everybody, what's going on? How you doing out there? It's me, Victor Serrao. Now, I want to say that we need to remove George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Alexander Hamilton, Andrew Jackson, Ulysses Grant, and Benjamin Franklin from the U.S. currency. Why? Because these are a bunch of nasty, racist bastards who were slaveholders, except for Abraham Lincoln. Now, with Abraham Lincoln, even though he made the Emancipation Proclamation, he did allow the border states of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri to be exempt. And certain areas of the Confederacy were also exempt, meaning that these areas could still have slaves. Basically, with Abraham Lincoln, his opposition to slavery was more of a political, military move. Okay, that's all it was. Because in reality, he didn't really care for black people. As a matter of fact, he didn't believe that blacks and whites should be equal to each other. Okay? He didn't believe it. As a matter of fact, even though he was opposed to slavery, he wasn't that opposed to slavery. He wasn't this hardcore abolitionist like you might have thought he was. He wasn't. As a matter of fact, when he married Mary Todd Lincoln was the daughter of a plantation owner who had slaves. He married a woman associated with slavery. So he wasn't really that opposed to slavery like you might think. Now, the fact that all these other men except for Abraham Lincoln had slaves, that means that there were human traffickers, okay? When you have slaves, when you acquire slaves, you're engaged in human trafficking, okay? And these slaves are held against their will, all right? And was sexually abused. A lot of them were sexually abused, okay? In this day and age, all right, in the 21st century, if you have a slave, you can go to prison for at least 20 years. And if that slave dies under your imprisonment, you get life in prison. If children are involved, that's life in prison. So basically, these men, except for Abraham Lincoln, had slaves. Children were involved, and many of the slaves were treated cruelly, beaten. Why would you want to honor these men by having them on our U.S. currency? Even though they're on a U.S. currency, they shouldn't be honored. These men are filth. They're garbage. They're disgusting. I mean, think about it. Every day, just about every day, we look at the $1 bill. We look at George Washington. We don't think nothing about his face, but that's the face of a human trafficker. That bastard actually has descendants because he had sex with one of his slaves. And his descendants are alive today, yet society denies it. Look at Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson has descendants because he was molesting his slave. These men are dirty, they're filthy, they're vile. And yet we have no problem looking at them on our U.S. currency. Even Ulysses Grant, look at Ulysses Grant. Even though he was a general for the Union Army, he had slaves. You look at these men, you think nothing about the fact that they were slaveholders. Well, as a matter of fact, I don't think a lot of people knew that a lot of these men were slaveholders, but if you do your research, you find out these men had slaves. The minute you find out somebody had slaves, they're disgusting. You gotta process in your brain, Okay? Process in your brain. If these men were alive in the 21st century, if they were alive right now, they would be locked up in a prison, okay? And they'd be getting abused in prison, all right? And they'd be sexually abused in prison, and they would deserve it. George Washington, he's a common face on the $1 bill, all right? And even though he had the Declaration of Independence and he was the general for the American Army, and America was broken away from King George of England. After all of that, and America was established, he still had slaves. He kept the slaves. He didn't free nobody. A lot of people will say, yeah, George Washington, he had guilty feelings about having slaves. Well, if he felt so guilty, he should have released all of them. But he didn't. He had them till the day he died. He's disgusting. Ben Franklin's disgusting. Okay? Everybody thinks, oh, Ben Franklin's, so great. Political figure, really smart, inventor, whatever. But he had slaves too. He's dirty. He's filthy. All these men are criminals. Okay? I would even say Abraham Lincoln can be a criminal because he married a woman who was associated with slavery. Okay, he knowingly married a woman with slavery, so he's filthy to himself. He's just as disgusting as the rest of them. So this is why I feel that we need to remove these filthy, dirty bastards from our U.S. currency. They need to be replaced with other types of people. People like Harriet Tubman and people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Henry Ford. People like that. People that made a real contribution to American society. Why not have a picture of pick somebody. Let me pick somebody. I don't know, Josephine Baker. Zsa Zsa Gabor. Whoever, people that didn't have slaves, okay? I mean, I don't want to see a bunch of racist bastards who imprison people for profit on my money. That's my money. That's my money I have to look at. That's my money I spend. Why do I have to have these people on my money? Anyway, people, it's me, Victor Serrao, and thank you for taking the time to listen to what I had to say.